Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to another video. So in this video I'm going to be discussing the scope idea. So what is a scope in C? Well, basically a scope is the way to deal with a lot of variables with the same name but with different meanings. So what I mean by this is that every variable has a scope. And when I say a scope, I do mean, well, it could be a local variable, it could be a global variable, it could be local relatively or global relatively. So if I declare a variable I here and I put in a value of 9 inside it, then I try to print that the content of that variable, then basically it'll print the content, right? Cool. But if I try to redeclare the variable again, and I try to compile, as you can see, it's gonna throw an error here. It's gonna tell me, oh, you have declared variable I, but you're trying to redeclare the variable again with the in the same place. So that name has been already reserved, so you cannot use that name anymore. But if you open up a scope and then you declare a variable with the same name, as you can see, you can declare that variable again. And that's actually because this I here and this I here are different. There are two different variables. Yes, they do have the same names, but they are not talking about the same memory location. Okay, they're not actually the same variables. They do not mean the same thing. As if you have two words in two different languages, the words do spell exactly the same, or maybe they are spoken the same way, but they do not refer to the same thing. It's exactly the same thing here. These two variables do have the same name, but they do not serve the same thing. So whenever I open up those curly braces, actually a new scope gets created, a new space, a new area of variables. So the variables here are not accessible outside, okay? But the variables outside of the curly braces are accessible inside the curly braces, okay? Let me repeat that again. The variables inside the curly braces are not accessible outside the curly braces, but the variable outside the curly braces are accessible to the variable inside the curly braces. So if I try to printf the variable I here inside the curly braces, and I'm going to deactivate this code here, as you can see, it can access that variable 9, that variable I that has 9 there. But if I declare that I variable inside the curly braces and then I try to print it outside the curly braces, then as you can see, it's going to tell me what I are you talking about. There is no I in the current scope, okay? There is no I in the current scope. So let me show you another example. So if I declare a variable I, the scope of the main function, and then I declare another variable I, just the same name, and then I put in another value 4, and then I try to print, which value is it going to be printed? Is it going to print the 4, the local variable relative to this scope? Or is it going to print the global variable relative to the scope? Well, basically, let's see. As you can see, it prints the local variable relative to this scope. So the local variables have due priority, okay, bigger priority. They're served first. So if I need a variable called I, then I search for it locally. If I can get it locally, then I don't bother looking global. But if I don't find it locally, then I have to search for the same variable, whether it was declared globally relative to my scope or not. All right, so it's the same thing here for functions. Since functions are declared with those two curly braces, meaning that every function has a different scope. So variables declared at a function f are not accessible by function j. Okay, so I cannot say here int y takes x. What x are you talking about? Okay, so x are stored in that scope, in that box, in that container that we cannot access. Only f, only neighbors to that variable can access that variable. Variable that do have the same scope. Okay. Also for loops. So if I do have an int I and then for I and then something, and then I have an opening and closing curly braces. As you can see, there's an opening and closing curly brace, so this is a different scope. Also for while loops, and the do loops. So everything, whenever you find a new opening and closing curly braces, put that in mind that variables inside that opening and closing curly braces are not accessible outside of the opening and closing curly braces. They're not accessible at all. So, well, so basically that's it. That's the idea of scopes. Okay, so thank you for watching and see you at the next video.